This is the School Success Podcast, a podcast for school leaders to learn from other school leaders what's working and what's not, and to get inspiration and encouragement, as well as strategies to grow school enrollment, connect with families, retain teachers, recruit teachers, and everything in between. You guys are heroes, and I cannot thank you enough for pouring into this next generation that's coming behind us. My goal is you will take at least one thing away from every episode that you can take back to your school to make it better than it is right now. Please enjoy the School Success Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Herzog Foundation.
Hey! Time for school!
Hey, School Success Makers. Welcome to another edition of the School Success Podcast. I'm your host, Mitchell Slater. I'm joined by a new friend out of Cleveland, Ohio, Madison Carr, who is the owner of Creative Chameleon Studio. And she does design for schools and nonprofits and is doing some really, really cool things in the world of design. And it's something that when I've worked with schools for years, we've helped from time to time with different design things, but it's not the main focus that we do. And I love that I've met Madison to be able to say, hey, let's dive into design for schools and why it's important to care about design when it's coming to your logo, the handouts, like your brochures, your rack cards, maybe different icons and things on your website. Design is super important. And I think it's something that schools need to take seriously if they're not currently taking seriously. So that's what this episode will be all about, is design for your school. But before we dive into all of those things, I do want to pass it off to Madison to introduce herself. So Madison, welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Mitchell. Super here.
It is going to be a blast. So before we dive into the nitty gritty here, I always ask the fun question to start us off with. And it's, if I was to visit Cleveland, Ohio, which I've never been to Ohio, so that means I've also never been to Cleveland. But if I was to visit Cleveland, Ohio, what would you say, Mitchell, you need to do this and eat this to experience all that Cleveland has to offer?
Well, Cleveland is known for a lot of things, some of them good things. I would say definitely our suburbs are awesome. There's plenty of places to eat, and you need to spend time on the lakefront. There's plenty of fantastic restaurants right on the lake that you can get good views, good food. We have incredible tacos around here. You will not be hard pressed to find some good tacos around Cleveland.
Okay. Is there a specific place I got to go get a taco from? Is there one that speaks to you?
My go-to is Barrio. They're in a few of our suburbs. They have some locations, but it is one of the local favorites for sure.
Okay, that sounds delicious. So, if I ever go to Cleveland, I'll make sure I get a good old taco. So, as we dive into today's episode, I'd love you to get a little bit of background on your design company before we jump in.
Yeah, I've been running Creative Chameleon Studio for a number of years. I think I'm approaching my 8-year anniversary. And I started out as just a general freelancer doing all kinds of design stuff for all kinds of companies, print, web, packaging, branding, all the bells and whistles. And then in the last few years, I've really focused more on schools, helping them understand what it means to have a brand and how to effectively position that brand well, and then also how to make them look good. So as a designer, I love things that work well and things that look good. So that's what I help schools do. And that's through that two-headed approach of strategy and design. I
love that. And I think it's something that's typically missed, I think, in the grand scheme of things for schools. I think maybe those that are starting a school or maybe had a school for a long time, they're like, oh, it is what it is. It's what we have. It's what we're going to go with. And so they maybe don't take it very seriously. But I know I can tell, and I'm obviously, yes, I'm in the industry for this, but I know others can tell too. If I put two logos next to each other, two brands of a school, say, hey, which one would you want to go to or go try out? I would almost like to say, I'd like to guarantee that you would probably pick the one that has a better design. Whether I tell you it or not, you just like look and go, ooh, that one looks good. And you haven't even been to the school before. It just looks like they took their design seriously, which means they probably take their school seriously as well. Would agree or disagree with that though?
Absolutely agree. Yes, that's one of those psychology things behind design. We always say, don't judge a book by its cover. And when it comes to people, that's true. When it comes to brands, we definitely do that all the time. We judge a company, a brand, by its appearance, by its logo. So when it comes to schools, there's so much value to be gained and so much harm that's at risk if you don't present yourself well. So giving thought to your strategic brand, who you are, how you look, for schools can be a major difference maker in whether or not they even get families in their doors. Now, if you can woo them once they're in the doors is a whole other matter, but just getting them there, that's where branding does a lot of heavy lifting.
So when we use this word branding, those that are like listening going, okay, I think I've heard the word brand or branding, but if you were to kind of put that in simple terms for those that are listening, what exactly is branding?
Yeah, great question. So when we talk about branding, you're right. It's a word that's thrown around a lot. We use it in a lot of different contexts. When we're talking about it for schools, a brand is very simply, it's just the perception or feeling people have about your school or your business. So it's not a tangible thing. When we talk about brand identity, that's the tangible thing. That's the visual assets you use to represent yourself. But the brand itself is really just the feeling people have. So it lives in the minds and the hearts of the rest of the world. But that doesn't mean that you have to just be hands off and have no control over it. We know from seeing massive companies, you can actually have quite a bit of control over your brand. Companies pour millions and millions into it to control their brand, to shape it. So even though it exists in your audience, in their hearts and their minds, you can still influence how they feel about you, their perception of you. So that's when we say branding, that verb really is giving thought to shaping that perception.
And my perfect example of that is Chick-fil-A. If anybody that's been to Chick-fil-A, been around Chick-fil-A, they are I think the best company, especially fast food company that is done well with branding. If you walk into a Chick-fil-A, there's fresh flowers on every table. It's just the everybody's in uniform and it's clean and the vibe is different. They say my pleasure. Like there's a brand for Chick-fil-A that you can feel the difference from when you do that and go into a Burger King or a McDonald's or a Wendy's. Not saying those stores are bad or anything. The brand is different. It is 100% a different brand, a different feel. And I'd rather go to a Chick-fil-A because it's usually just a different feel. I feel happier when I'm in a Chick-fil-A, and I love that. So that's what you're talking about when you're saying a brand that it's not tangible. It's something they feel, correct?
Yes. And Chick-fil-A is one of my go-to examples for brand strategy in action, because you can tell very easily that Chick-fil-A, what they're serving is really no different than any other fast food, even if you really love their chicken sandwiches, they're really no different as far as a product goes from other fast foods. But you can see that they've clearly given thought to shaping a perception of what it means to have an experience at Chick-fil-A. And even the fact that the employees say my pleasure, that is a strategic decision. And you can see a lot of those on display when you encounter Chick-fil-A. So there you can see how a bunch of small interactions, we call them brand touch points, how a lot of those touch points influence how a customer feels. And then if you do it with enough consistency, it becomes this ingrained perception. And that's why Chick-fil-A is growing the way they are, and how they have this position in the world of fast food, that if you want to feel happy, feel good about yourself, have a great sandwich along the way, Chick-fil-A is the place to go. Even when you see the long lines, you're not deterred by it. You know they'll move fast. The price is worth it. All those things are built off this perception that they've crafted over time.
So if we take that example for Chick-fil-A and we bring that into the school and education sector, what does that kind of look like if we bring that into the school world? Like, wait, I want the Chick-fil-A brand experience when people come into our school. I don't want them to feel like they're in another, I don't want to badmouth any fast food chain, but another fast food chain. You go and you're like, oh, I don't feel safe. It feels dirty in here. Like, how does this school have the Chick-fil-A experience?
Yeah, so that all stems from this idea of brand strategy. Something I do with my clients before we even talk about logos and colors is this idea of brand strategy. And brand strategy is, again, I say quite simply, even though it encompasses a lot, but it really is it's internal alignment for external influence, right? So what it does is it says, we're going to get our decision makers together. We're going to put them in a room. I'll be there to facilitate so we actually, can kind of get somewhere. And we're going to talk about what is our vision for our school? How do we want to be positioned? How do we want to be perceived? Right. So for some schools, being the Chick-fil-A in the world works for them. For others, that might not be quite the right perception they're going for. Every school has its own secret sauce, if you will. So that strategy working is it's really saying, who are we? How do we want to be perceived? Let's be mindful of the landscape we're in. We're competing against other schools. Who are they? Who are we trying to reach? All these really important strategic things, and from that we craft a strategy roadmap. And that's a comprehensive document that says, here's all the important ingredients that will help shape the perception we want to have, and that helps all the team members get on board. So if you go to Chick-fil-A, for example, the fact that all their employees are very buttoned up, they're presentable, they say the same things, that didn't happen by accident. That is through training. So Chick-fil-A is working off of a strategy document to get everyone on the same page. So schools can do the same thing, but it starts with gathering the decision makers and saying, what is our vision for our school? How do we want to be perceived? And now how can we influence that through our touch points, through our actions, through our visuals, through the words we say? It all starts with finding that true north, which is that strategy roadmap.
So that could come down to, hey, are we going to have uniforms for our staff and our students, as well as what are we going to say when somebody comes in the door, and how soon, or how do we communicate and handle conflict? All of that comes down to brand, then, you're saying.
Yes. Yeah. And there's internal and external. So I always think the best brand is really understood thoroughly from corner to corner. But if you think about kind of like iceberg, there's not a ton of things that people see from a distance. So all these internal things of how do we communicate, how are we organized, that all matters because it influences the touch points that people do see. And with schools, you don't quite always know what families are exactly seeing. You can think you can understand it, but once they come through the doors, you can't micromanage every single interaction they have. But you can give your staff guidelines, a framework of saying, when we represent our school, here's how we want to come across, here's our personality, here's our tone, here's our vision. And you can get all the staff and the faculty on the same page, and that helps influence all the little interactions that families are going to have. And then even before they even enter the schools, there's interactions. Your website, your Google ads, the logo on kids' T-shirts as they're running around their neighborhood, the sign in front of your school. All those things are touch points, interactions people have that have the ability to shape their perception of you. So the more thought you can give to those things and the more framework you have for it, the more accurately you can control your brand in the way you want to be perceived.
Hey, I just want to take a really quick break from the podcast to highlight one of our amazing partners and sponsors, ClassReach. If you're a new school administrator or founder and are struggling to keep up with all the hassles of planting a new school, like collecting tuition, communicating with parents, or handling student data, then you need ClassReach. ClassReach is the all-in-one software that helps with everything from admissions and tuition to classroom management and parent communications. Sign up for a free consultation with one of their school specialists and see how ClassReach can help your school grow today. You guys can check them out online, classreach.com. They are a kingdom-minded company, and I love their leadership team there. I've become friends with a lot of them. They truly are a great company. I support them, and I love them, and you guys will love them too. Check them out at classreach.com. Now, back to the show. So I'm gonna give you a chance here in just a second. I want you to share like a couple tips on that a school can maybe do on their own. If they're like, hey, what are some things they could be thinking about that they could update? So be thinking about that just in a second. But I want to put this in there to the schools that are listening. Like we're talking about this is more than your logo, guys. Like this is more than like we go, oh, well, we have a brand, we have all that stuff done. We have a logo and it's on our shirts and we put it on our hats and we sell it in the store at the football games or whatever. It's like, we're talking about it's more than the logo that's on your hats and on your sign outside. I would say it's and I'm sure you would even we could get into this really easily, but saying when people pull into the parking lot, like what are they even seeing from there? It's like, is your sign even visible from the road? Is it all grown up with hedges around it? You need to trim it up and look good. Is it stained with dirtiness and mold that you need to clean off the sign? And then they walk up and maybe some of the light bulbs are out at your school and it doesn't look welcoming when you come in, and the windows are dirty, and like all of that comes down to like brand. Like, how are you looking to the outside people coming in for the first time? And an impression is everything. That impression, that first time somebody coming in the door of like, is this where I want to pay, or is this where I want to enroll my student to have to be here for 12 years or 10, whatever it ends up being. Like, that's a big decision. And we're talking about a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. If your tuition, I like using $10,000 as the example, but if your tuition is $10,000 a year and you're a K-12 and it's a kindergarten family, you're talking about $120,000 of potential in a, there's all more variables in there, but $120,000 coming up to go, you probably would have cleaned the windows that morning if you knew a $120,000 deal was coming up to the front. You probably would have done things a little bit different if you have that mindset. But I think sometimes it's hard to have that mindset when we're talking about the grand scheme of all these things. And yeah, I could get on that high horse for a long, long time, but I'd love to pass it off to you. Are there some tips or things that you could say, hey, schools, here are 3 things maybe you can do that would help in this, that they can do maybe on their own today?
Yes, absolutely. I think the starting point is always identifying the misalignments. And that's something I do when I come in and facilitate strategy workshops is we start by just really getting a grasp of what do the decision makers think about their school. And then I'm kind of that neutral third party voice saying, wait, I hear some disconnect here. And then I'm there to help, bridge the gap and get people on the right track. But you can start to identify that misalignments early on. And something I encourage a lot of schools to do is it's a shameless plug, but I have some free resources on my website, some worksheets that you can have, different decision makers fill out and then compare answers. Even just a simple question of describe our school in 1 sentence. How would each of your decision makers do that? So get your head of school, your principal, your enrollment director, admissions, marketing, all those different people, all those different heads, put them together and say, each of us are going to write down a sentence describing our school and then compare them. And I think some schools will be a little shocked of what people choose to highlight. And you might also find out that we're all saying the same things or kind of all in the same sphere here, but is it really connecting with our ideal audience? Like that target family we want to reach, is that what they want to hear? And some schools might find out we don't even know who we're trying to reach. If you can't quickly and accurately describe your portrait of a graduate, you probably have some branding issues, right? So understanding those misalignments is something that any school can start to do, and that just you begin by saying, how are we describing it internally? Are we describing it the same way internally? And then is that how we want the external people to see us? Is that lining up with our vision? So that's step 1. That's that's a free thing. Anyone can do it. It'll uncover potentially a lot of gaps and holes to be filled. And then second is, once you have some idea of that, is really that external thing is, do we understand our target audience? That's one of the big portions in the strategy workshops I do. We spend a lot of time just dreaming and writing out who is this target family we're trying to reach, because a brand cannot be all things to all people. No matter how great your school is, you cannot be all things to all people. So the more you accurately identify who you're trying to reach, the more you'll understand how to speak to them, what their pain points are, what they're researching, what they're trying to figure out in life, how you can win them over. To your point, a family's deciding not just where to put a lot of money, but really who's going to have some of the biggest influence in their kid's life. And that's a very big undertaking for schools. So being able to speak to that family and say, hey, here's what our school offers. Here's why it directly affects your pain points. We know who you are. We care about reaching you where you're at. A school that can do that is going to win against all competitors every time. Yeah. And that's something that any school can start to give some thought to. It's helpful to have a strategist come in and facilitate those things. As I'm sure you know, and all our listeners know, being in a school, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So sometimes it can be hard just getting on the same page. Having an outside party come in can really help with that. It's that bird's eye view, that outside perspective. But even just through conversation, that can start to be aligned internally of saying, who is our family? Can we identify what that dream student looks like? And then can we figure out how to talk to them, how to connect with them? All that even influences design choices in the end. And that's more psychology there, but it matters. To have that strategy figured out is the foundation for the rest of the brand building.
I love it. So I would love to dive into, thank you for sharing those actionable steps. And actually, if I could add something real quick to that first one, for those that are listening, if you have your teachers or everybody who works, fill in a sentence of what to describe the school. If you guys want, just take all those responses, depending on how big your school is, and just put them in the chat GPT and say, hey, what's the commonality in all of these responses or the biggest differences that we're missing in this? And chat GPT will in 2 seconds say, oh, you guys are all agreed that you're an honest school, or you have really good academics, or whatever it is. Like it'll give you that really quick. So you don't have to try and go through and go, let me make sense of these 50 responses from all the staff. Like I know everybody has a love-hate relationship for AI, but there's some really cool things you can do with it that'll help you save a ton of time and effort and all that. So I would love to, just because I love this part about brand of like when we're talking about colors, if we could just talk on like colors just for a little bit, because I kind of geek out on that when I remember hearing about years ago McDonald's and the reason why they pick red and yellow and the reasons why, Chick-fil-A picked red. And like there's a lot of power in colors and why we have picked colors for certain things. And so like I know when I first started my company, I picked orange, one because orange is my favorite color, but orange is also like it's excitement, it's bright, it's colorful, it's new ideas. It's like I was kind of reading on the psychology of the colors and I was like, oh, this is really cool. Like how much power is in color. So if we could just talk really briefly about that, what are some cool things maybe just for schools to learn from why they should be maybe looking at different colors over another?
Yeah, there's a lot of psychology behind color, color theory. And yeah, my studio's colors are also orange in part because they're my favorite color, but also that they get the idea of creativity, of energy. And that's something that when it comes to schools, they have to give thought about colors potentially a little bit more than other companies do. Because when it comes to schools, when we see how a school brand is represented, there's a lot of emotional tie to the logo, to the colors, and there's the sense of legacy being built. So I've seen with a lot of schools, it can be very hard to let go of certain things when it comes to the visuals. Color is one of them. It's hard to rethink your color scheme. But there's two kind of qualifiers I really think of when I'm designing a school's logo and colors. Is one is functionality, and usually that comes down to want to make sure it's easy in the marketing team to use these things. I have a soft spot for marketing teams who have to deal with challenging color palettes. So the first thought is, how can we build a color palette that is functional? So there's some general rules of thumbs that I have as far as how many dark and light colors you have, so you have contrast available, functionality as far as it being used on screens versus printing, a lot of designer lingo that I kind of sort out behind the scenes. But bottom line is that you want your colors to be functional. The colors do so much heavy lifting for a brand. They're the real workhorse of a brand. So you want to make sure that they look good and they work well in all the different areas colors will be used, from uniforms to signage to your website. So we want to make sure the functionality is sorted out. And then the second qualifier I think of is that emotional connection, right? Is this reflecting our brand positioning? And, for some schools, let's say they are going more the vein of being prestigious. Probably having a highlighter yellow is not going to give the right feel. A gold would. So, kind of figuring out what is the perception of these colors. Schools also have to, with their competitive landscape, they have to really give a lot of thought to the schools in the surrounding area. Other companies don't quite have the same struggle, but for schools, if we're picking gold to be our color, does it really work for us if there's 4 other schools in a 20-mile radius that have gold as their main color, right? So there's that balancing act of, it needs to reflect who we are. It needs to connect with our audience. It needs to evoke the right sense of our school, but also it needs to be ownable, right? We need to be able to have some kind of ownership of these colors, of this logo, of this visual style. So that's something that we give a lot of thought to as we're scoping out the competitive landscape. I was working with a school that blue was a major player of their color palette, and they didn't want to stray far from that, but their top competitor also used blue. So then the conversation became, well, we can use blue, but we have to find the right kind of blue, and maybe we can differentiate with our accent colors, right? So maybe blue is our kind of anchor color, but can we introduce another color or two that we can have ownership of to differentiate from this other school that is our top competitor? So, psychology, competitive nature, all that kind of comes through when selecting color palettes. I will say, in all my times of working with schools, I do think the color palette is probably where the most conversation happens in the process, probably even more so than the logo itself. The color palette is usually the biggest point of debate. But it is that workhorse. It does so much heavy lifting for the brand. So it's worth giving it the time to get it right.
Is there a no color? Like, no, don't use that color in your logo as a school.
I would say it's not quite a no, but it's a proceed with caution kind of color. Yellow is a real struggle. I just worked in a school that had yellow, and getting the right kind of yellow, that goes more to the functionality issue. Yellow is just a really challenging color, in part because our eyes actually don't perceive yellow. We don't have a cone that perceives yellow. So how we view yellow is relative. So that means there's a lot of variety for people. And how it appears on screens and printing, it's really hard to keep it consistent. It's a challenging color to utilize. So for that reason, I often advise schools, if you're going to use yellow, maybe lean more towards gold or orange. Just give it some more contrast, and maybe don't make it like your only color. Have some other colors to help out there. And then, there's other colors that psychology-wise are a challenge. Pinks and purples are a bit of a challenge. I have a school client that utilizes a soft pink very proudly. They don't shy away from it. But there's other colors that, it really depends on that landscape of who else is in your field. And then is it connecting with the right families? Very loud neon colors might not connect with a family who wants a really calm, peaceful environment for their kid. Some families might want that high energy. Their kid, needs less stimulation. Their kid's very active. They might want that. So it really comes down to your audience, your competitors, and then the personality of your school.
Okay.
So I can't say that there's an absolute no of any color. I'm sure some school out there could utilize every color, but there's some reasonable precautions to take with colors.
And there's the one that's like the easiest or most used. I'm assuming it's probably like a blue. Probably is the most.
Yeah, blue gets a lot of airtime, a lot of focus on blue. Green also just the sense of growth, of nurturing, particularly for younger focused schools. I'd say a lot of middle and upper schools focus a lot on reds, maroons, kind of these deep, more mature colors. So again, you can probably find any school that utilizes a color well. But there's definitely some tried and true colors out there that you can't go wrong with.
Hey, school success makers, Mitchell here. I just want to take a really quick break from the show to give a big, huge shout out to the Herzog Foundation. I absolutely love the Herzog Foundation. I've been friends and partners with them for a couple years now, but we're bringing it to a whole new level. And I'm excited to share that our very own School Success podcast is now featured on the Herzog Foundation Podcast Network. The Herzog Foundation is a powerhouse of resources designed to support schools like yours, from free training events through the Herzog Foundation Institute to their incredible online news publication, The Lion, and of course, our new podcast, Home. They have everything you need to stay informed and inspired. And if you're dreaming of starting your own Christian school or co-op, don't miss their online course, Schoolbox. It's a fantastic resource to help you get started on the right foot. At School Success, we're proud to partner with the Herzog Foundation to bring you these valuable tools and insights. So visit herzogfoundation.com to explore all they have to offer. Trust me, you won't want to miss out on these amazing opportunities for growth and success. And I love all the people over there, and I know you guys will too. So please go check them out, and you won't be disappointed. Now, back to the show. Okay. So we talked briefly earlier about like identity design, and I don't know if we dove into maybe a ton yet. So the difference between, I know we're talking about the like the Chick-fil-A type of thing, like the brand design, but then identity design. What is the difference between both of those for people to have the tangible both sides?
Yeah, so we talk about brand or identity design. It's really that entire visual system of a company. So we start with a logo. A logo is that cornerstone element. It's the one visual element that will identify your school. Its only job is really to identify that you are this school. So if you think of, when cowboys and herd ranchers, that they would brand the cows with a brand, that is kind of where the word brand mark came from. So this idea that this visual element signals that the cow belongs to this herd, not this herd, right? That's all it did. Um, Logos are the same thing. So a logo is simply a visual element that says it is this school, not this school. It differentiates and identifies between schools, companies, organizations. And then off of that, we have a broader identity system. And that is the collection of all the visual elements routinely used to represent your school.
Okay.
So there's some typical, foundational elements that basically every school and every company has. The logo, the color palette, the fonts are kind of the three main things that are going to be used most often. But then you also have a bunch of other elements that you can and probably should determine as being part of your identity system. So patterns, photography style, iconography, even supporting graphics like borders or dividers, shapes to use, all those kind of things. Some companies can get very, very specific. Some keep it a little more broad, but that visual identity system is simply the predetermined elements that are used across the entire organization or the entire company or the entire school. And they're used with consistency and frequency. And the end goal hope is that whenever someone encounters something with these visual elements on it, that they know it's associated with this school. So Chick-fil-A is a good example. Coca-Cola is a good example of those things. The colors, the typography is used with such a consistency that even without seeing the Coke logo, you know that certain shade of red can is a Coke can. Yeah. That a white kind of swirl motif, that means it's Coke. So those elements are all part of an identity system. And the more you identify it, the more you determine what they are, how they're used, the more consistent they are in their use, the more you can create that idea of a brand identity. So when they see a kid wearing a certain shade of blue, they know, oh, that's from this school. So there's some foundational things. There's more options of what can be identified, but it's just that view of what are the elements that are identifying our school beyond just our logo.
Okay. I know a lot of that falls into like the psychology of design and what we kind of talked about. We've already kind of talked about a little bit about that. Is there anything else you want to add inside the psychology of design that we've talked about?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I tell clients is, there's two things that I become quite a parrot for, but I say simple is always better. And that really comes down when it comes to logos. I often say a logo's job is to identify, not storytell. We want the logo to reflect the personality of a school, but we don't need to tell its whole history. We don't need to fit 5 different kind of elements in there. Simple is always better. And a reason simple is always better is that something that's simple, that is clean, it does just give a better sense of trust. And trust is something that we talk about a lot when it comes to schools, is how can we build a brand, how can we build a perception that signals trust? And having consistent visuals is a part of that. There's psychology behind that, where if I see a school that remains consistent in how it represents itself in all these different touch points, all these different interactions, that to me would say, okay, this is a school that has given thought to how they behave, how they act, how they present themselves. That starts to build trust. A school that doesn't have that, where everything's kind of scattered and you can't quite sense if they've given thought to consistency or how they're perceived or how they're represented, that doesn't build trust. So there's a lot of psychology in that vein alone of, giving thought to design and branding really matters for trust. And trust is, the most valuable currency that a parent and school exchanges. So there's a lot to be gained by giving thought to how do we represent ourselves can we do it consistently? And that alone will gain a lot of ground.
So I know you shared a lot about when we talked briefly before we talk about the actual podcast recording itself. You mentioned a school church combo, and how like that could be an interesting brand for, and I'm sure there's listeners that have a church related or a school related, oh my goodness, a school related to a church or a part of like a sister. And how do you suggest having completely different logos for that, or should there be some like overlap so you go, oh, that church or that school is connected with that church? Well, you shared a little bit about that, and I thought that was really cool, so I'd love to kind of hear about that a little bit more.
Yeah, that's so one of my recent clients is a church school combo, and they had that very question, and it intrigued me, and we spent a lot of time figuring it out for them. But how do you deal with one entity but two branches of a brand? And I'd say I've learned in working with them and working with other schools that there is not a one size fits all solution. For some school and church combos, it makes total complete sense to have separate brands. For others, it makes total sense to be united as one brand. Probably the trickiest part is they're one brand, but speaking to two different audiences. That's kind of a challenge there. So something I learned along the way, and we uncovered as working with this school and church, is really a lot was gained in doing the exercises to identify their target audience, because they realized that there was some crossover of people who attended their church and attended their school, but the school had kind of this whole separate audience profile that wasn't tied to the church. And the school definitely couldn't say, well, we'll just ignore them. Like, no, we need them. Like, we need, half of our school body to resonate with our school. So a lot of that was figuring out that balance. And I think for the church school combo that's not quite sure of how to approach that, I think the secrets are uncovered in doing those exercises to figure out your audience, and that will determine what the right solution is. If it really becomes apparent that who we're trying to reach is the exact same kind of families that attend our church, well, then there's a lot to be gained by having the brand as one entity, completely tied together, visibly, everyone knows it. If the church and school's vision is, yeah, our school is supported by our church, but we really have a vision to reach beyond our church when it comes to school families, there's potentially something to be gained by having that affiliation, but maybe not front and center. Would that deter the school family looking for just a solid school? Would that deter them if they think it's completely intertwined with the church? So a lot of that just comes down to who you're trying to reach, and even what your education model is. So for if you're a classical Christian school, that's baked into your approach. You're not going to be able to really separate, the Christian approach. So that should be part of your branding. That should be, really tied into how you present your school, how you talk about it. For other, some churches, they view their school arm as a ministry outreach. So there's all these different kind of combinations that are there. I've learned that it all starts with understanding who you're trying to reach. And if you spend the time figuring that out, that pretty clearly then gives the direction of how should we handle the brand. So for the school that I worked with, we realized that tie was really important to their history, that there was some crossover between church families and school families, but that there was a big part of their school body that was not affiliated with the church. But they didn't want to shy away from their origins, that, their goal, their vision is to give kids a foundational understanding of Christian beliefs. It's integrated into their curriculum, so they can't drop that affiliation. Yeah. They don't want to hide that. But it really came down to, on the design side of things, we came up with a logo that tied them together well, still had a visual representation of them being Christian, but also that the broader identity, the way they talked about things, it was still very inviting and open and welcoming to people who weren't affiliated with the church. It wasn't so heavy-handed that people felt like they couldn't approach it as a school. So that was, that solution kind of came apparent as we were diving into their target audience. I think for every church school combo, that ratio is different of who they're trying to reach. And that's a starting point to figure out how should we approach our branding? How should we approach our identity? It comes down to who are we trying to reach?
And there's definitely not a one size fits all for all this. So like obviously
Not
those
at
that are
all.
listening, you're like, oh, I'm just going to do exactly like what this other one did. It's like, that's probably not going to work for you. And it really is not a one size fits all. You have to figure out what works for you in your school, which is why hiring somebody like
Mhm.
Madison to say like, hey, can you come help me? Because I'm not understanding how this works. And you want to make sure you do it right. You might want to, you could save, yeah, of course you could save some bucks doing it on your own or going online, but is it going to be done the right way that's going to actually help you for years and years to come? Probably not. So you probably want to hire somebody professionally. So if people, Madison, want to get in touch with you, what's the best way they can reach out or get connected with you and your company?
Yes, I am very active on LinkedIn, Madison Carr, or you can find me on creativechameleonstudio.com. There you can see some designs in action. I have free resources there, worksheets for brand voice, dream student assessments, alignment and stuff. You can grab some free resources that helps kind of can be that catalyst for figuring out if you need branding help. Is a good kind of starting litmus test for that. And you can also reach me directly through my website. And always happy to talk further about whatever problems are happening at your school with your brand. Happy to talk and give some thoughts on that.
Awesome. Well, I got one final question for you before we wrap up. If all these school leaders listening, if you were to share one piece of advice, I know all this has been advice, but if one extra piece of advice for those school leaders listening, what would that one piece of advice be?
Yeah, I really think when it all comes down to it, consistency matters. So any school can gain a lot of value by just their head of school getting together with the decision makers and saying, can we come up with one sentence that we all agree on to use when describing our school? I think that is an hour-long meeting, well worth your time, well worth the effort. And even if it doesn't spur this whole rebranding process, it will help unify your team. And staff, faculty, they're deep in the weeds of working with kids. Having a head of school say, hey, here's how we want to describe our school, here it is, hold fast to it. That just instills a lot of confidence and unity on the inside, and that always produces good things on the outside perception. So that, I always say, any head of school, principal, an hour of time giving thought to that is going to be well worth it in the end.
I love that. Perfect. Well, thank you for taking time out of your day to hop on the podcast, talk to our listeners about design. I hope that they were able to take at least one thing from today that they can go, oh, I can do that to our school to make it better and look better and have a better brand. So appreciate what you do. And obviously, thank you for taking time to hop on the podcast today.
Thank you, Mitchell. It's great being here.
Well, another huge shout out and a thank you to Madison for taking time and being on the podcast today. I love what she's doing in the world of design and helping schools with that. So, of course, that is you. Please reach out to her and through her website and through LinkedIn to get connected and maybe just have a conversation about what that would look like, her coming in and helping your school with design. Because obviously, as we talked about it, it is very, very important. Well, as always, I like to highlight our 3 free resources here at School Success. And of course, the first one is the podcast that you're listening to right now. Free episodes dropping every Monday. So make sure you're tuning in and you are subscribed to the podcast so you get notified when those come out. And if you're loving the podcast, we love a 5-star review and a nice written up thing of how much you're enjoying this, because it takes a lot of time and resources to put these out and give these to you guys. So we want to make sure you're loving them. So please give us a 5-star review if you haven't yet. The second free resource is on our website, top right-hand corner. It's the School Success Report. It's a weekly email that comes out with different articles our team has either found or written to help you have a great, successful week. So make sure you're getting that School Success Report, top right-hand corner of our website, on the website, which is schoolsuccessmakers.com. Last but not least, the third free resource is our Facebook community, which is free, of course, like I just said. And it is called School Success Makers, and you guys can join there with all the other school leaders that we have inside of there. I'm personally in there. Would love to see you in there as well for asking questions, getting to know other educators in the space. Great little place to congregate and have fun online. So go make sure you join School Success Makers on Facebook. Well, as always, guys, it's been fun and it's been real. It's been real fun. So we will be back here next week with another awesome guest as usual on the School Success Podcast. We'll see you then. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Herzog Foundation.